Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy visited Washington, D.C. on Tuesday in an effort to secure additional funding for the war against Russia in his country.
Today's discussions in the White House and in Congress across both parties and both chambers with the Speaker were very productive, and I thank you for the bipartisan support. And we have freed 50% of the territories Russia occupied after February 24th.
During the visit, the Pentagon announced $200 million of ammunition and equipment using already appropriated funds. President Joe Biden asked Congress to approve an additional $61.4 billion supplemental package before the winter recess.
Congress needs to pass a supplemental funding for Ukraine before they break for the holiday recess, before they give Putin the greatest Christmas gift they could possibly give him.
If the funding doesn't pass by the break, it will have to wait until the new year. As of Wednesday morning, no funding has been approved, and the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, wants to address security on the southern border before approving money for Ukraine.
I have also made very clear from day one that our first condition on any national security supplemental spending package is about our own national security first. The border is an absolute catastrophe, and this is because of the policies of this White House and this administration.
So what's Ukraine's plan moving forward? President Zelenskyy signaled a bit of a New Year's resolution in 2024, and that's to achieve air superiority.
We aim to win the air battle, crushing Russian air dominance. This will intensify our ground advantages in 2024 with our control of the skies. Who controls the skies controls the war's duration.
And the war's duration is becoming increasingly important. A Gallup poll shows that a growing number of Americans, though a minority, will support a quick end to the war, even if that means giving up lost territory. Democrats tend to support staying the course and helping Ukraine regain its borders. In the joint press conference, President Zelenskyy was asked about that. His response?
That's insane, to be honest.
As for now, President Biden is taking it one step at a time.
We'll continue to supply Ukraine with critical weapons and equipment as long as we can, including $200 million I just approved today in a critical needed equipment, additional air defense interceptors, artillery, and ammunition.
President Zelenskyy wasn't alone in Washington. Last week, a group of Ukrainian soldiers visited the Hill and also stopped by our studio. We spoke to one American serving in the armed forces of Ukraine. Sergeant Ashton, we've got some ground to cover, but beforehand, please let us know what is it that you do in the Ukrainian Army, a little bit about your background.
Sure, Daniel, and I want to say it's great to be here. Slava Ukraini, and the welcome from the people of the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, specifically here in Virginia, has been tremendous. It's good to be back home in the United States, and I've said this on other occasions. I've never been more proud to be an American than I have been during the time I've been serving in the armed forces of Ukraine. And currently, after having served in the armed forces for more than 15 months and having been at the front lines for the entirety of the full-scale invasion, I am serving in the main directorate of moral and psychological support operations of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Prior to that, I was spokesperson for the Territorial Defense Forces, and before that, I was an active infantry soldier fighting in the Donbass and Kharkiv regions.
And in the United States, you've heard people talk. You watch American news. You are American yourself.
Yes.
And the sentiments are split, throughout the population.
I'd like to push back
Sure.
on that. I don't feel the sentiments are split. The American people stand with Ukraine, and the American policymakers and elected officials stand with Ukraine in overwhelming numbers. The question is, how can the American people best support Ukrainians' efforts at liberty and liberation? But there's no split. There's a small fraction of Americans who are being engulfed in this Kremlin regime of lies. But other than that, the Americans understand freedom. The Americans were the leaders in freedom since 1775. And Ukraine is ultimately a successor to the American ideas and ideals that led to the greatest republic in history. And Ukraine looks forward to being America's greatest partner in Europe after victory.
And just this week, the funding bill for Ukraine to get more funding there didn't pass this one time around. It might be expected to pass in the near future. What kind of sentiments did you see up on the Hill from people in the legislatures?
It was amazing. And the reason I'm calling it amazing, we spoke with people from the Progressive Caucus. We spoke with elected officials from the heart of the GOP. And on both sides of the aisle, they understood that a Ukrainian victory, full victory, return to the country's 1991 borders, was not only in the best interest in saving the Ukrainian people from genocide, but in the best interest of the American people. And that's why they know that this next $61 billion will just be another small step towards the best American foreign policy investment in the last 90 years.
And as we know, Ukraine is not a NATO nation, but it's right next to several NATO nations. There aren't a lot of Americans fighting in Ukraine. It's a little silly for me to say that because you're an American fighting in Ukraine. What's at stake in Ukraine for Americans if Russia pushes down further?
Let's talk American tax dollars.
Sure.
And I hate to talk about blood and loss of life in dollars and cents, but due to the fact that the Atlantic Ocean is between Europe and the United States, sometimes the only thing that the American public can truly understand is, are their tax dollars effectively being spent? And so what's at stake is that if the American people and the policymakers and the elected officials don't continue to stand by Ukraine and help us, because make no mistake, America can guarantee Ukraine's victory as long as they continue to stand with us until a return to the 1991 borders happens, then the risk to NATO nations becomes very real. The Ukrainian people themselves are spilling the blood necessary to keep the Russian tyrants and the Iranian tyrants and the North Korean tyrants, this access of tyranny, out of NATO territory.
And you're talking about the 1991 borders, and a recent Gallup poll has shown that as the war wages on, there's a little bit of fatigue in the American people, and a growing number of Americans, still a minority, feel that perhaps if we could just end the war and give up a little bit of territory, that's one way to just get this all finished. What do you say to that? Let's
remove the idea of fatigue. The American people understand liberty, liberation, and victory. When you look closer at the crosstabs, when you look closer, when somebody's asked, do you support Ukraine until victory, the American people overwhelmingly support it. So it's truly just this murkiness that's being asked of them in these polls. But ultimately, it's not a question. The American people stand with Ukraine and will continue to do so when they're able to look at the situation from a factual standpoint and not the standpoint of the Russian chaos agents.
And you mentioned the second biggest army in the world owned by Russia. The biggest is the army in China, which is getting a lot of attention. Their military, because of Taiwan, and also another big hotspot in the world is Israel. So there's a lot of attention going on all around the world. Are you seeing any challenges in maintaining focus on the task at hand in Ukraine?
Here's the good news. As long as there's this war of genocide against Ukraine going on, the Ukrainian people are not being affected by the other situations that are breaking out around the globe. They're focused on making sure that they are able to survive. They're able to make it through the winter. They're able to destroy the enemy in front of us, which are the Russians led by Vladimir Putin and his regime of evil. So while there's the conflict in the Middle East and the US Congress is clearly focused on the situation in the Pacific, we're focused on one goal: freeing Ukraine, returning it to its 1991 borders, and proceeding as America's greatest partner in the center of Europe.
Sergeant Ashton, thank you for stopping by.
Thank you, Daniel. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you.